Welcome to Coaches Uncaged, everyone, for our latest episode of Faculty Focus. So I'll be interviewing Beatrice Zornek, who is a member of the Animas faculty as a coach supervisor today. And I'll just pass over to Beatrice to find out how she is today and give a little bit of an introduction about yourself, Beatrice. What's your business practice look like, and perhaps share a little bit about your coaching practice.
Hi, Brinsley. So lovely to be here today. And that was a compound question. Come on, you know better. So where do I start? How am I today? I'm really well. The sun is shining. I know it's raining where you are. And an introduction into what I do.
Please, yeah, that'd be great.
Mm-hmm. So I'm a coach specializing in career transitions. As someone that's been one of the periods of my life that's been the most perhaps intense and eventful. So having gone through that journey myself, I'm really excited to be able to support other people, because it's a really career transitions, whether it's into a leadership role or changing careers, they can be really stressful periods. And I think very often they're associated with shifts in identity. It's like your old you is disappearing or perhaps dying, but your new you hasn't yet emerged. And that period can be really tense, but also very rich in terms of what you can discover about yourself. So that's me as a coach. And I'm also a supervisor. And I have a passion for helping highly sensitive people. I work a lot with highly sensitive coaches in my practice. And I use a blend of Jungian psychology, transactional analysis, internal family systems. So anything that has to do with a bit of like internal parts of ourselves.
Fascinating. Thank you. So there's kind of different strands there of your coaching practice. And there's the supervision piece, there's the career transition. Would you say those are the two main strands? And then within that work, you bring in Jungian psychology, typology, internal family systems, was it? And TA.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, my business or my practice consists of the coaching and supervision. Now it's mostly supervision. So I'd say maybe about 70% of all the work I do is supervision. But obviously, I think it's really important when you're a supervisor to also be coaching yourself, to be in your own supervision, so that you can, improve as a supervisor. So how else would you improve as a supervisor unless you do the work yourself as well? Yeah.
Makes sense. Okay, that's interesting. So when of course, we're looking at the business building side of your practice today, and how you developed it. So as we're just focusing on that piece there, at the minute, 70% of your coaching work or income comes from supervision, and then 30% is from the coaching piece around career transition.
Yeah.
Nice. And I guess that's not always been the case, but you've found yourself at that kind of split at the minute. What sort of led to that?
Good question. I thought I was going to be a coach. And I am a coach and I love coaching. But I had, it was just a coincidence, I think, that it was an opportunity for me to train as a supervisor. I was part of the first cohort that got to train with the ICCS, so the International Centre for Coaching Supervision, which is the sister school from Animas. And I just thought it'll be interesting to do that training. But as I was doing the training, I just found it so transformative for me. It completely changed how I thought about coaching. It completely changed my coaching practice, and it made me feel really convinced that actually I want supervision to be a really big part of my practice. So I'm really happy to be able to do that now.
Yeah, it sounds fascinating. And I guess is it a completely different skill set to coaching itself? Did you feel like you had to learn a new skill set, or was it more an extension of that skill set?
It's, when you train as a coach, there is a lot that you use from your previous experience, but also you have to unlearn a lot. I'd say supervision is much more similar to coaching than, whatever other job you might have had previously. So it's much more similar to coaching, but there's also a lot of unlearning, especially in terms of, in coaching, you're very focused on helping people find the answer. And of course, that's really important in supervision as well, but you're working much more at the process level and a relational level with the people you work with. So there's also an element of mentoring, working on the process, sometimes parallel processes, and it's almost like you're working in parallel with the coach and the client and with the relationship that's happening between us. So there are a lot of similarities, but it's not like coaching the coach. It's a different process.
Yeah, no, makes sense. And yeah, thanks for kind of pleasing my curiosity. I was taking myself off in a different strand there when we got into the theory. But if we bring it back onto the business building piece of, how you created your coaching practice, and perhaps the title for today's interview is, how you created a coaching practice as a HSP coach, right? And that's not some sort of term for business building for a bank. When I heard that, I was like, HSBC, business building coach. I was like, what does that actually mean for people that are listening who might not know the term HSP?
Yeah, it's funny you said that, because I often thought about using HSPC as my as part of my branding, because it's the highly sensitive person coach. But yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, because when I read it before, I was like, this sounds like joining a bank account.
Yeah, it's not the bank account.
So yeah, tell us, what is it? What do you mean when you say that title?
So HSP, or highly sensitive person, is a personality trait. It was coined by Dr. Elaine Aron about 25, maybe 30 years ago, who, she's been researching this term for all this time, and she does a lot of work around it, with statistics, but also with MRIs and things like that, to see how the HSP brain is different. But in a nutshell, what it means is someone who is very in tune with their environment, from an emotional perspective, from a physical and mental perspective. So to go in a bit more detail, Dr. Elaine Aron, when she talks about HSPs, she refers to the acronym DOES, does. So D stands for depth of perception. So highly sensitive people tend to experience life and experiences in general in more depth than people who aren't HSPs. And this is the reason why we generally need more downtime and more space, more quiet, even for me as a highly sensitive extrovert, which is a bit rarer, more rare, you know what I mean. I still need a lot of downtime. And then you have the O, which is overstimulation, especially under stress. We can be overstimulated by too many things coming at us from the outside. So whether it's strong emotions from people or environments we're in, lights flickering, noise, TV being on, radio, so things like that. And then there's the E, which is empathy and emotional sensitivity. So we tend to be very empathic and very in tune with people's emotions, which is a very good thing for a coach, but also can be a difficulty if you're absorbing emotions and you're getting very involved in people's stories or the challenges that they bring. And then the S, so the last letter, stands for sensing the subtle. So we tend to be very aware of very subtle changes in the environment, whether it's physical, but also emotional or nonverbal language. So that really helps us to read faces, or, obviously, but these are all skills that you can also train. So it's not like highly sensitive people are better coaches than people who aren't highly sensitive, but just we have this natural ability to do that.
Thank you. And yeah, I also identify as a HSP. I've got
I
two
didn't know that.
Yeah, I've got two HSP children. So I often read
Oh,
your
wow.
posts with quite a lot of interest, which is kind of why I kind of knew a bit about you before we had this interview. Some of the posts you make on LinkedIn and Facebook, they're all really fascinating. I read a book about, you know, raising HSP children as well,
Yeah.
which was super interesting. And I guess as building a business as a HSP, there is a certain amount of hurdles that you overcome, and also some super fat powers that come alongside that as well. And I guess those hurdles are practical and emotional. But I guess we can dive into that today in the conversation of what's that like building the practice. But before we do that, you know, I've got a picture of, you know, where you're at now in terms of the makeup, I guess, of the income streams of the supervision and the career coaching. But what's a brief potted history of, I guess, qualification to arriving here with this practice? And, you know, what did you do before you qualified as a coach as well, just to give the listeners a bit of context to that?
Yeah. So very briefly, I studied IT and science in high school, and I hated it. And I was the only person in the class, in my classroom, who ended up studying psychology. And I'm so happy that I did that. I think I somehow had an intuition at the very early age that was my path. And then I had a very eclectic career. I wanted to become a therapist after graduating, but you know, you need to start earning money and to make a living, and training as a therapist would have been very difficult. I had a very eclectic career. I worked for Google in a remote, like, freelance project for about 5 years. I worked with a high school dropout who became millionaire by age 23, and I was writing World of Warcraft guides for him, for players. And then I got into sales. I moved to London. Then I got into recruitment. And then my last role before leaving was as a head of HR at the startup in London. Yeah, so that's how, just before the coaching. And I started having health problems. I was really stressed. I was working really hard in my role as head of HR. And in addition to the health problems, I started feeling really tired. And in hindsight, it probably took me about 18 months to realize that what I experienced was a burnout. And I realized that I could go to, to my coach, I could go to therapy and things like that. But I knew that I needed to make a much more drastic change with my life. That's going to be more sustainable long term for me, for my health, and for the way I am as a person. And I think as a highly sensitive person, I didn't quite understand what I needed from that perspective. So perhaps I pushed myself too hard. I didn't have enough space to, for downtime or for myself. So that was quite stressful. And then I decided to train as a coach just for my own benefit. But the first day when I landed in the training, back then it was a live in-person training, I just had this overwhelming sense that I'm absolutely in the right place. Even before the training started, it was just such a profound experience. And then once the training started, it just confirmed everything for me. And in that moment, I knew I had to quit my job. I had to make this my thing. From thinking that to it actually happening, obviously it was a period of time, because I'm a very risk averse person. So I found it quite difficult to make that shift. But yeah, I qualified in 2019, and then I quit my job just over 3 years ago. And I haven't looked back since. It's been a really challenging journey. I'm not going to lie to you, really challenging, especially because of my own emotional journey with the burnout and my mental health. But I would not change it for absolutely anything. It's just, yeah, I feel like this is absolutely my vocation.
Wow, sounds like a really, really nice journey, and quite a winding one for you, kind of arriving here. But
Yeah.
you qualified in 2019, and then 3 years later, you were working as an independent, self-employed coach.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing. And now what I imagine we'll pick up on is the strands of what that was like going on that journey as a HSP. So feel free to kind of weave in some examples of how that showed up in that business building piece.
Mm-hmm.
So, but let's start from the beginning when you were qualified as a coach and you had this intuitive feeling that this is the right place for you. What was your next steps after qualification to building this practice? How did you did you arrive at these niches in terms of career transition, being a HSP coach? What did that
Yeah.
process look like?
Oh, yeah, good question. Well, first of all, I think one of the best decisions I made, because I had no business knowledge of building a business. I had knowledge of business from working in a business, but that's very different. So I think one of the best decisions, and I was lucky that I came across this at the very beginning, was joining Catherine Watkins' membership. And she just offered us so much support. What I found very frustrating as part of her membership is that she doesn't tell you what to do. She just gives you the options. And when you're a new coach, you just want to know, like, but just tell me what to do. It's really frustrating. So I feel in a way it took me longer, but now I'm so grateful to her that the way she works is in that way, because it really enabled me to come to my own conclusions and find my own blueprint. So in the beginning, I was working as an inner critic coach. And it was really interesting because as I was speaking and working with people who had an inner critic or identified with the message I was putting out there, I realized that not everyone who has an inner critic is my ideal client. And I realized that there is a certain type of person who has an inner critic who is my ideal client. And eventually, probably after about at least 12 months, probably even longer, I realized that what differentiates those people is the HSP trait. So that's how I came to the HSP, to working with HSPs. And I already knew that the work I wanted to do was more around careers. I don't want to focus on relationships. I don't feel drawn to that kind of work, although that sometimes comes up in the coaching work you do. So then when I became a supervisor, I just felt it was so natural for me to do that, especially because as a highly sensitive person, in general, trainings and even business advice isn't tailored to HSPs. So I thought, well, I've gone through my own journey. I've discovered things that work and things that don't work. So it just made absolute sense for me to do that as a supervisor as well.
So it's kind of emerged through that experience that you've had of working with different clients to figure out where your spaces might be or your niches might be. And you've landed on these two kind of core spaces at the moment: career transitions and supervising HSP coaches.
Yeah. And I was just going to add that this is where I do my best work, when I work with HSP people. However, I do really also enjoy working with people who aren't HSPs, and I think that's really important because there is a risk that we just get to know our side of things. We become so comfortable in that universe that we don't get to know what's outside. And I think so I've really tried to find a balance and make sure that I can work with people who are diverse, whether HSP or not, or from other perspectives.
Yeah, I guess it gives you that variety as a practitioner to always develop and have different types of conversations.
Yeah.
Nice. So for 3 years you were working and trying to create a coaching business.
Mm-hmm.
Were you working full-time? Were you working part-time? Like, what did that look like? And how was that balancing the two together?
Yeah, so from the moment I quit my corporate job, I just completely focused on coaching full time. Well, it wasn't really full time because I didn't have, I didn't really have clients, and I found that really challenging. Especially with my mental health and my physical health not being great during the same time. Um, my expectations of myself were so high, and the realization that people don't just queue at your door the moment you decide to become a coach, that was quite difficult. That was quite difficult to deal with. But slowly but surely, and I think a good thing I did, and I would advise this to other HSP coaches out there who might resonate with my own journey, is that I haven't compromised. I feel that I've done it perhaps the hard way. So I don't know if I'm a good example of a business owner who's built a multi six-figure business in a short period of time. But I really feel that I've built something that's sustainable and really supportive of who I am as a person. And I think the fact that I haven't made any compromises and I've allowed things to emerge organically, that's made a huge difference.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, I think I kind of made a mistake there. You actually quit your job and then you focused
Yeah.
full-time from coaching rather than had the two running concurrently. So you were
Yeah.
fully
Well, actually,
emerged in the process.
yeah. And I wouldn't advise this, by the way. I wouldn't advise just leaving cold turkey. Initially I said I want to move part-time, and I moved to 3 days a week. And then 2 months later, I was like, no, I just can't do this. And I had some savings, so I decided that I was going to use my savings. I, you know, I think people put undue pressure on themselves when they just quit a job and they don't have any source of income, whether that's savings or a side job or working part-time. And that puts a lot of pressure onto something that is really meaningful. And I think that when you do really meaningful work, very often it's more difficult than something that you have more detachment from, like someone else's company. So yeah, I wouldn't advise doing what I did, but if I'd recommend that you either have a part-time job or do something that brings you some income, and potentially having a team and things like that, or having some savings. I think I was in a really fortunate position to have those savings, because then I was able to really invest in myself. And I think that without investing in yourself, it's not impossible for sure, but I think I would have made my life and my building my business a lot more difficult. So investing in myself was a really key piece of where I am today.
So it sounds like it really worked for your context at the time, and the position you were in to kind of make that jump, because it's like you say, it's very cold turkey, and that does work for some people, of course, and others they build up over time whilst they're working part-time or full-time. But you mentioned a few things about the work that you've done on yourself and some of the mental health challenges and challenges you had as creating that business in that moment where you perhaps expected people to be knocking on your door after you qualified as a coach, and that wasn't happening. And does that kind of tie in with this HSP, highly sensitive person building a coaching practice? Kind of, does that link there around those traits?
I think the link is before HSP. When you try to live your life according to societal norms or societal expectations of what success looks like, and when you work in an organization, it's very easy to measure your value or your worth you know, you're going to work 40 hours a week, you're going to get X amount of salary. Usually people, you know, in 1 or 2 or 3 years, they get promoted. So it's a very clear direction, and you know what to expect in 2 years and 5 years and so on. But with coaching, it's not like that. When you're building a business, especially when you're very focused on the vocational aspect, so you feel very drawn to the coaching aspect rather than the business aspect. And I haven't felt drawn to the business aspect. I just wanted to coach. That makes it more difficult, I think. And I think you really need to leave behind all the things you've learned about what it means to work. You know, you work 20 hours, you get X amount of money. But when you're building a business, you can be working hundreds of hours before you start to see revenue building up. And it also matters how you're spending that time, because many people might choose to do like cold calling or just approaching people they might have some like never necessarily don't have a prior relationship with, and you just contact them and go, you know, what are you struggling with? Can we have a conversation? And there are people who do this beautifully, like Sachin, for example. I know he doesn't do it exactly how I just said, but he's great at approaching people and starting conversations. But that's never been my strength, and it's been really important for me to do it in a way that works for me, and finding my own blueprint took time. And it's still a work in progress, I'd say. Yeah. Sorry, I feel like I went on a bit of a tangent, and I don't know where I started from. Can you bring me back on track?
All good, all good. We can jump back on track or go in other tangents. And apologies, there's some building work going outside, so you can kind of hear.
It's not. I can't hear it. So.
Okay, great. So it was interesting to hear you talk about your blueprint, and I guess that is kind of on track, really. To my next question is, you know, what is your blueprint for enrolling clients or marketing yourself? Or maybe you don't use that terminology, but what is it that you do that attracts clients to you?
Yeah. I mean, I think, let me just wind back before I go to that question, because we were talking earlier about streams of income. And yeah, I think part of my blueprint is my network and people, building relationships. And I think I never really realized how big a role that played until I became a coach. And I'm just naturally, I seek role models, and I spend as much time as possible around those people. And I think that I was, in a way, I was lucky that created some opportunities for me. For example, I had a brilliant opportunity to spend a year in Catherine Watkins' business, where I worked side by side with her, supporting her, in her business. And then I got to work with Animas and with ICCS. So there are lots of smaller streams of income and work that I get to do in my business. And this isn't a blueprint, you're never going to guess that someone is going to come to you and say, hey, how about this opportunity? So I think it's really important to figure out what strengths you have and use those. Like, for example, finding clients, and you were asking about marketing. In the beginning, I thought, well, everyone does it through social media, especially if you want to build an online business, you have to be present on social media. And I started posting loads on social media, and just nothing was working. I think I spent maybe like 4 months of daily posting on social media, and I got 0 clients. And at the same time, what I was doing, I found it really important to be part of communities. So one of the communities, for example, is the Animas Lounge, the Facebook group. And I just loved when other coaches were asking questions, and they were saying, how do you deal with this problem? Or how can someone help me with that, and I just loved that kind of conversation. That made me feel so included and belonging, and I felt like I was able to add value to other people like myself. And then after a few months, I started to notice that people started approaching me from the Animas Lounge saying to me, do you know what, Beatrice, I've been following you for the last 6 months, and I never said anything. I never added you as a friend. But I kept thinking, I'm probably going to want a coach. And now is the time when I want a coach or a supervisor. And I want it to be you. So I started to realize that the marketing method that I was using as my marketing method wasn't working as my marketing method. But the thing that wasn't work, it was fun. It was so enjoyable for me to be part of that community. That became my marketing method without me even thinking about it as marketing, because I never did it to try and get clients or anything like that. So in a way, I guess what I'm saying is this isn't necessarily helpful to someone because this is so unique to me. But what's really important is to keep your eyes open to what is actually happening in your business, because you might be so focused on a stream of something, marketing or social videos, YouTube, whatever, that you might be oblivious to what the actual opportunities are for you. And I think this is how you build your blueprint. You go like, hold on, that just happened, and then it happens again, and then it happens again, and that can become your blueprint. So now I'm part of many groups and communities of like-minded people, and that is to a large extent my marketing. I don't see it as my marketing, I see it as fun. And then the way I create posts on social media is usually from someone asking a question and saying, how do you handle this? And then I think, oh, that's actually a really good question to be sharing with other people. So that's also how I generate my social media content, and it's much easier.
Sorry, I was just on mute there. Thank you. Yeah, really interesting to hear about that. And kind of what I took from that was that you were coming from this place of service, almost being a supervisor or a mentor to other coaches within the Animas community. And you noticed through that process of just being of service and taking part in something that you really enjoyed, then that actually became the thing that had clients come to you, or people come to you to work together, rather than the posting.
That's such a good point, Brinsley, because people always say, you just need to be of service. You don't need to be in service, blah, 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 service. Yeah, I need to be in service. But I think it took me a long time until I actually got it. And I think now what I do is I really don't think about the business. I don't think about the money or the work anymore. I do think about being in service. I'm very boundaried, so I only do what feels good and when it feels good for me. But now I'm completely in service of the person I'm speaking to, even if being in service means saying, do you know what, maybe we shouldn't work together, or maybe you should find another option right now, or yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you kind of picked up on that being of service mantra that we hear bounded around or spoken about quite a lot. I know Melissa Ford's written a book about it, and obviously the Prosperous Coach. But I think when we do it as an agenda, like, okay, I'm going to go out and be of service, that's not what we're talking about here. It's that piece where you're actually doing something that you genuinely enjoy for the love of doing it, and you actually just of being of service naturally, which I guess is that HSP trait that comes through of naturally being someone that wants to be of service, which we see lots of highly sensitive people moving towards in their careers, right?
Yeah. And when you're trying to work with other highly sensitive people, and you're writing social media posts with the secret agenda that people are going to work with you, because why else would you be creating marketing posts on social media? But people are just going to read through you, especially if they're highly sensitive people. They'll just see that you're trying to sell, and highly sensitive people don't like being sold to. Oh my God, like I've made so many decisions not to work with people that I would have worked with otherwise, just because I felt they were pushy, like, this is so unnecessary, why do you do it? So I had to walk the talk, right? I had to do it myself as well. So yeah, thanks for
Yeah.
picking on that.
I'm nodding along and smiling there because I completely identify with that as well. Just anything salesy or pushy, then I just kind of reel back from that as a highly sensitive person.
Yeah,
And it's
and
great
you're
that
a consultant with Animas, and you totally get to do this as well. And I can see, because I work in supervision with people in training, I can see the quality of people you're bringing into the training, because all those people are there because they want to be there, and not one of them was sold to or convinced to be there, despite their better knowledge. So yeah, kudos for that.
And I think that's such an important thing when we're working with people, to support them in making a decision, right? Whether that's to work with us as coaches or enroll into a training program, it's about them making the right decision for themselves. And I'm glad we got around to the highly sensitive person piece, and of course it was woven in as well. But before I kind of ask you a few more specific questions around that, I'm just curious to stay in this area now around you doing this work on social media, helping people, mentoring them, supervising them, answering their questions. What happens, like the nuts and bolts of the detail, from you doing that to them being your client? What does that process look like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm also on coaching directories. I would really recommend coaching directories. And another thing I would recommend in terms of having streams is associate coaching work, if you can make it work for you. I couldn't make it work for me. I didn't enjoy it. So I decided not to do it. But usually people approach me, so I don't think I ever say to someone, oh, would you like some help with that problem? And I know Sachin will probably just think, oh my God, Beatrice, how can you're missing out on so many opportunities. But it's just not how I do my best work. So people approach me. Obviously, to get to that stage where people approach you, you have to be to build a presence somewhere, wherever that somewhere is for you. And I think it's different when someone approaches you because they want to work with you versus you approaching someone else. So I arrange, initially I have a 10-15 minute phone chat with people. I find that's easy because you can quickly decide whether it's a good fit. And also because a 10-15 minute call, anyone can make time for that. So we can have that conversation pretty quickly, rather than, oh, when can you make an hour? Oh, well, in 2 weeks time, because everyone's got busy schedules. So then you disconnect from the momentum you have, with that momentum that made you say, do you know what, I want to speak to Beatrice, or I want to speak to a coach. So I have that phone conversation. Oh, I might be sharing a bit more of the ins and outs of how I work. Sometimes this initial conversation turns into a coaching conversation at a later time, especially with someone who has never met me. So for example, if someone might contact me through the life coach directory, has never had a coach before, and I feel that we're a good fit, then what I might do is I might decide to have an initial a complimentary session where I give them an experience of the coaching, and then we decide whether we want to continue working together after that. So it's kind of the prosperous coach approach, but it's very adjusted to how I like to work. And I find that what works for the people that I work with is having a few touch points. So we have this initial phone chat, And then we might arrange a coaching session, and then I'll send them a follow-up email. In the email, I might include a couple of testimonials as well, especially if I have testimonials of people who've gone through similar challenges. So then they sort of get to see, especially because I'm lucky that I have a few testimonials that are very long, so they're more like case studies. And then people get to see, oh, this is the journey that this person has been through with Beatrice. And then they get to see whether that fits with them or not. And then by the time we have a coaching session, it almost feels like they already know what they can expect. So then it's just a very easy process from that stage.
So there's this approach from clients to you where they say they're interested to work with you. You have this 15-minute initial conversation just to check that there's a fit. And then after that, you will invite for a coaching session if you feel it's appropriate, and perhaps an email in between. And then after that coaching session, that's when you both decide whether you're going to work together or not. Is that kind of loosely what kind of happens most of the time?
Mm-hmm. What I do actually after the coaching session, I arrange another 5-10 minute phone chat, like 24 hours or 2 days after, because sometimes the work that we do in that coaching session can be really deep. So then you might leave with your mind is, you're somewhere. And then at the end of the session, we're like, oh, so would you like to arrange a 5-minute chat tomorrow, blah, blah, blah. So, or like, do you want to work together? So I like to allow that space. And some people make that decision right away, but others appreciate having the time to just reflect, sit with the session, and then decide the next day. And this process, I find it just so easy for me. Yeah. And I only do this with people who have never had any connection with me, who've never heard of me, then with people who, someone from the Animas community, for example, or people who have worked with me in group supervision or in another environment, then the process doesn't need to be as involved because they already have an experience of me.
Now that makes sense. So it's really tailored to the person who's reaching out for you. But that process sounds nice, and it sounds like it's something that works for you, most importantly. And I guess you arrived at that through trial and error as well, of tweaking that process. What sort of mistakes or things have you learned along the way of kind of trial and error and building this practice? Anything that's sticking out for you as key?
Yeah. In terms of enrolling clients, you mean?
Yeah, or anything else around building a coaching practice.
So in terms of enrolling, I think it's valuable to have in the beginning a process that you can follow. So I followed Catherine's 7 steps to yes. And then I also tried following the Prosperous Coach. And I think that really works for a lot of people. But it didn't work entirely for me. So then how did I come? I think the mistake that you can make is to take someone else's word that this is how you need to do it, and then follow that process, even if it doesn't really resonate with you. I think looking for resonance inside yourself as you're trying different processes, that will give you the clues about your own blueprint and what works for you. And another mistake, I don't know if mistake, but advice that I'd give myself is to notice when something isn't right for you anymore, to be able to say no to those things when they've finished their course, when they've outlived their usefulness. Because as you start doing work, and especially as you start building different streams, and I would highly recommend not putting all your eggs in one basket and trying to develop different streams to your business or different sources of clients, you will notice that you're now, a year later, you're able to have much nicer clients from a certain source, or you're able to charge more, or whatever it is, and you realize, oh, this really works for me, but I need to say no to something else. And sometimes we may put more pressure on ourselves than necessary. And one very good thing I've done for my business is that I work 4 hours a day, 4 days a week. And for that, I've needed to say no to a lot of things. And having the integrity with myself to say no to a lot of things has really, really created so many more opportunities for me, I think.
That must be so challenging to say no. But I guess that kind of links back to what you were saying.
Especially as a people pleaser.
Oh, right. Okay.
To say no, yeah.
Yeah, I bet.
Or a recovering people pleaser, yeah.
So you were a recovering people pleaser and an extroverted, highly sensitive person. And you mentioned at the start that downtime is important to you as being a HSP. So that's kind of something you've learned about building the process, building the business, is actually 4 hours a day for 4 days is what works for you and allows you to do your best work, I assume.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very nice. Thank you for sharing some of those kind of takeaways from building your practice. Can you give us an overview of being a highly sensitive person and creating a business? I got the kind of picture of what that means and the definitions, but what would you say to other highly sensitive people out there that are building a coaching practice, things to be aware of when you're building a practice? And maybe we touched on one of them just now, but what else is there for you?
Work with other highly sensitive people. That was really, really important for me. Just being able to feel understood and be on the same wavelength, that was really, really important. And also work with people who aren't highly sensitive. I always have like 20% of the people I work with, in terms of, my therapist, for example, isn't a highly sensitive person. And I think that's important as well, because otherwise you risk being in this loop of highly sensitive person and missing out other things which might be, equally important. So that's one piece of advice. Don't compromise. The other advice is think about your business in the long term, and think about building it in an organic and sustainable way, rather than rushing. So I'm really fortunate, I think, that I did it the hard way, because I didn't see clients. I probably had 1 or 2 clients in the first 6 months of business, and that was really hard. That really knocks your confidence, because you need confidence in the beginning, but coincidentally in the beginning, that's when you have the least confidence. But I built, a website, a free, ebook that people could download, a mailing list, like all these things. Think about what's going to support me long term, so that maybe if I don't post anything on social media, or if I don't add 10 friends every day, I'm still going to have people reaching out to me. They might not do it right away, but then in the long term, I'm building that, the foundations of my business, so that people reach out to me rather than me constantly have to put in the effort.
Lovely. Thank you. And there's this real essence of building this profile around yourself, of the work that you've done. And in that way, you've built relationships with people in a one-way street, as in they know you and they know what you do and what you're about, and then they kind of reach out to you. And what I took from you talking about building your practice was really the words that sort of emergence and sensing and organic kind of comes up for me as I hear you speak. Would that ring true for you?
Yeah, it really, like, I had a felt sense, as you said, sensing and organic and true for you. That just really, like, oh yeah, it's like completely. And I think it's definitely a harder route to building a business. So you need to balance that with the practical reality of your life, right? I was in a really fortunate, but I've had to make some difficult decisions, like buying a house and things like that. And instead keep the money I had to invest into my business and to pay myself a salary. But I had to do that for the first 18 months of my business, to dip into my savings. Obviously, in the beginning, I was paying myself more, but then after a while, I started to get income from clients. And actually, in the last, so after 18 months, my business became completely self-sustained. So I support myself financially from my business.
Fantastic. So things are looking, comfortable for you financially, or should we say stable for you financially to have a business that provides.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you need to work out what it is for you, because if you're a single parent of 2 children with no savings, then you might need to make very different decisions to the decisions that I made. I have a partner, I don't have children. So I think from that perspective, I'm in a very, luxurious position to have been able to really focus on myself, to invest in myself so much. And to build a business where I don't have to work many hours. So I can give the best of me to the people that I do work with, but also to be able to support myself financially.
Yeah, I guess context is everything, isn't it, when it comes to making those decisions along that journey?
Yeah.
Well, we're approaching 60 minutes and I could keep going, but yeah, it's been a really fascinating conversation. So thank you for all your thoughtful answers and all of the insight that you've shared today. Something I wanted to touch on before we go is that I follow you on some of these platforms such as LinkedIn and social media, and I downloaded your ebook from your website, which I thought was really, really great. I loved reading it, so thank you for that content. And maybe we can point some people in the direction to where they can find you after today's interview if they're kind of listening. Where would that be?
Yeah, thank you for mentioning my ebook. So my website is beatricezornek.com. And if you /ebook, my ebook is, let me see if I can remember the title. It's 5 tools to help highly sensitive coaches create more powerful results for their clients. And I'm mentioning this here because obviously everyone listening is going to be a coach, and maybe some of you will be highly sensitive coaches. So if that's something that resonates, feel free to get my ebook. And you can find me on social media. My favorite channel is Facebook. Feel free to friend me on Facebook. I share a lot of sometimes personal things and a lot of my work there. But if you prefer something more professional, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn.
Brilliant. Thank you. And yeah, many listeners will be coaches because this will be on Coaches Uncaged, the Animas community, but actually this will probably be on our YouTube as well. So there'll be other people who are just interested in coaching, listening, who might also find that really useful. And I'll make sure we put those links in the comments underneath in both platforms so people can find yourself through those links. But thank you so much today, Beatrice. Really, really lovely speaking to you. And yeah, we'll catch you another time.
Yeah, thanks so much for holding such a beautiful space, Brinsley. Thanks.